Oh, no, a couple minutes.
So, Vivian, now that I see a bunch of people here, can you put the staff memo up on the screen also? Or just those? If it's possible.
Are we ready? All right, we will call the August 3rd Plan Commission meeting to order. Let's start with the pledge, please. Vivian, would you please do the roll call?
Here. Commissioner Greta, Commissioner Levine, Commissioner Wolfbart, Chairperson Berkloff.
Here.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum.
We have
In fact,
quorum,
we're all
yes.
here.
Okay, let's do this
Let's discuss the minutes of July 6th. I'll entertain a motion to approve and then we can discuss. Are there any comments?
Yes, on page 2, Lori, second paragraph that starts, Mr. Huvard. Third line, section C provides that a homestay rentals, either the A should go or the S on the end of rentals should go, I think.
Let's say provides that a homestay rental.
Okay, sounds good. And toward the end of that paragraph, parked overnight on the driveway or other approved surfaces, is that approved or improved surfaces?
Improved.
Improved.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, I will make those changes. Any other comments? I don't see any, so we have a motion to approve and it's been seconded, so let's vote.
All in favor?
Or all in favor, yeah, we can, all in favor? Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved, thank you. Do we have any visitors wishing to address the Plan Commission? Yes, sir. Please step up.
If this is on the plat of subdivision, would you like to wait until after we've gone through the staff report? And
I think that probably makes a lot more sense.
if you'd like to.
Yeah, I would like to. Let's wait until you understand.
Okay. Okay, great, thank you. Yes, please. Does anybody else have any comments other than what's on the agenda? All right, then let's move to new business. Approval of final plat for Green Building Technology Subdivision 1400 Saunders Road. Bruce, would you like to start with some comments?
Thank you. All of the members of the Plan Commission have received a staff report that describes the application that's been made, the documents that have been submitted, what's been reviewed. And there are review letters from the village engineer, the village ecologist, the village's certified wetland specialist, and from yours truly on legal matters pertaining to the plat. The review of subdivision plats is controlled by the subdivision ordinance of the village. Under the subdivision ordinance, if a property wants to be subdivided, of course, it has to be within the district. It has to meet the lot area minimums for that. There are a number of requirements in the subdivision code. They're all spelled out, extensive list of submittals and documents. If an applicant submits all of those documents and they're reviewed and approved, meet the terms of the subdivision ordinance, then the Plan Commission's duty is basically to approve the plat. In other words, this is not like other matters we've had before us, which were zoning hearings, where we were weighing the benefit to the public, where we were weighing excellence in design, where we were being asked to change zoning, and there were a number of standards that we had to look at before we would consider that. The applicable standard in the subdivision context is, do the subdivision documents comply with the subdivision ordinance? For that's the reason you see these review letters in here, and basically you have the property at 1400 Saunders is slightly more than 10 acres. The proposal is to subdivide it into 3 lots. Each of the lots would exceed the minimum lot area. Would be normal rectangular lots, except you see the middle one will be quite a bit larger than the ones on either side. Each of the lots would have way in excess of 80,000 square feet, which is the required minimum. We have, besides sort of the basic standards for the size and minimum area of the lots, there are other requirements in the subdivision ordinance. For example, if there had to be internal streets, if we were concerned about where access would be, here the driveways have been laid out and reviewed by the village engineer. Here the 3 lots each would have direct access to Saunders Road, direct access to village water and sewer. So really there's no issues with the infrastructure needed to provide services to these new lots. There was a house on this tract. It's already been removed. So there has previously been a house on this tract that received services. So again, from the standpoint of the ability to serve the properties, it's really not an issue. Another matter that the engineer has to look at is when the property exceeds a certain size, the requirements of the Lake County Watershed Development Ordinance come into play. And those requirements stipulate a certain amount of detention for the impervious surface that's created. However, if the total amount of impervious surface remains below a certain threshold, then there is no requirement to provide on-site detention basins. Some of the larger subdivisions, if you recall, even with the proposal that was before us last, there was a lot of talk about detention and detention basins. This particular proposal, it's been suggested, will have a limitation on the total amount of impervious applicable to each of the lots that would keep the entire subdivision below that threshold that would otherwise trigger the need for detention. I think the other notable thing on the property, obviously, is the wetland area that's located on the property. When there are wetlands, the wetlands have to be delineated in the field. And once they're delineated, of course, you try to not do anything that harms the wetlands. There are a series of restrictive covenants that the Watershed Development Ordinance requires that we impose on the property to protect the wetland areas. The village has had probably 5 or 6 subdivisions over the last number of years that had wetlands or had areas that had to be protected. And we have come up with a set of rather standardized restrictive covenants that meet the requirements of the Watershed Development Ordinance. We mentioned in the staff memo that these have been provided to the applicant. They have to be revised, provided to us and approved and recorded at the time that the subdivision plat is approved. And those would, they basically prohibit any kind of improvement in the wetlands, anything that would create a runoff of any fertilizer or chemical into them. It's basically the idea is to try and do everything you can to preserve their health. One of the ways that that's done is by creating a wetland buffer area around the wetlands. The buffer area is not as restricted as the wetlands, but it is subject to some restrictions, and its intent is to provide a buffer, an area where there's less foot traffic, less disturbance, because the water as it enters the wet area is being filtered through the wetland buffer area to some extent. The amount of the wetland on this site is quite extensive. It turned out to be of fairly high quality. And the certified wetland specialist that the village uses is Jed Anderson. He's with Christopher Burke Engineering. They've been doing the wetland work for the village for many years. Under the Watershed Development Ordinance, we have what is known as first of all, we are a certified community, which means that Riverwoods has voluntarily and asked to take on the responsibility of administering the Watershed Development Ordinance. And by doing so, we have to adhere to the rules of the Lake County Watershed Development Ordinance. And we have to have someone who is familiar with those, has expertise in those rules to apply them. And so we have an enforcement officer, which is our village engineer, and they have a sub-consultant, which is Christopher Burke Engineering for wetland matters. When it comes to the determination of the extent of the wetland buffer area, there is some interpretive art with that. You'll hear something about that later tonight. The wetland buffers are suggested to be a certain distance away from the wetland, depending on the quality of the wetland, but they can be reduced if, in the judgment of the enforcement officer, there are good reasons to do so. I did some looking around in the Watershed Development Ordinance. I looked at some cases on this, and I don't find any suggestion that the determination of the enforcement officer is something that is subject to review by the village board or by the plan commission. In other words, this is a technical matter. The Watershed Development Ordinance stipulates that the determination is to be made, that the Watershed Development Ordinance is to be administered and enforced by the enforcement officer. So again, we asked for some additional background in this case because we knew there was some concern over the fact that the wetland buffer in this particular subdivision have been reduced in some areas, not all. And we asked Jed Anderson to be here to explain his rationale for why he thought that this was the appropriate wetland buffer on this site. So basically, Steve Zimmerman, the village ecologist, has reviewed the tree mitigation plan. He provided a letter supplementing or amending his letter from a few days ago, but I think all he really did was recalculate some of the tree mitigation fees. Just to remind you, in property that has never been occupied by a home and as the result of a subdivision, we have a little bit more flexibility in the woodland protection ordinance. We allow that the protected trees within the footprint not be mitigated because this is a property that never before had a house, and everyone else in the village, they deal with their protected woodlands after their house has already been there for a long time. So the Woodland Protection Ordinance allows for that kind of flexibility, and I think Steve went back and recalculated a few of the fees to take away some of the fees that he had charged before. But essentially, the trees have all been surveyed, the tree mitigation plan has been reviewed, and you have Steve's comments on it in his review letter. You have the village engineer's comment letter, Jed Anderson's letter approving the wetland buffer and the wetland delineation is there, and then he have his additional letter explaining his rationale. And then you have a letter from the village attorney going through some of the more technical issues on the plat that need to be addressed and some of the other requirements of the subdivision ordinance. So the conclusion of the staff memo is that the subdivision as proposed meets the requirements of the subdivision control ordinance with the conditions noted in the various review letters, all of which need to be addressed to the satisfaction of the village board and before recording. That's just sort of a quick summary of where we are. If you have particular questions, Russ probably can answer some. I can answer some maybe. Jed is certainly here to discuss them, or we can.
Get that thing on. I think the thing that concerns me most about this plat is the fact that for one of the houses, we are reducing the 100-foot recommended buffer area between it and a high-quality wetland to 50 feet. Unfortunately, I have dealt with other properties within the village where we had protected wetlands and properties were sold and the purchasers were totally unaware of those limitations and stuff was done that should not have been permitted. But to say, okay, everybody is going to abide by this 100-foot buffer except the one house and we're going to drop it down to 50. 50 feet is not a lot when you're going to talk about someone who's going to want to come in and they're going to take down trees and they're going to put in turf grass and they're going to fertilize and herbicide and they're 50 feet away from a high quality wetland. This really bothers me.
Well, in the 5 or 6 subdivisions I've been involved in, the wetland areas are staked. They're actually have physical markers, and that's one of the requirements of the declaration. I'm not aware of the circumstances where you've talked about this, but in any event, the wetland buffer could be reduced with or without the subdivision plat. It's not the plat that's reducing the wetland buffer. So the homeowner could propose a home and ask for a reduction of the wetland buffer even without the subdivision.
Well,
It's not the process. In
yeah.
other words, it's not the process. We're not approving a reduction of a wetland buffer. We're approving a plat. So it has
but
nothing.
the plat does show.
Right, but that's, in other words, even without the plat, that the applicant would be able to petition for reduction in the wetland buffer.
Right, and we would then have the right to say yes or no.
No, the enforcement officer, that's what I'm trying
Okay,
to say.
that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Do we then have no authority over this and only the enforcement officer does? Because it makes me uncomfortable, but I'm not the enforcement officer.
Right. Well, let's ask the enforcement officer what his rationale is then. Jed, you're up.
Okay, I'm up. Okay. So as you've seen in my memo and projects all over Chicagoland, this is a fairly routine review. In reality, this is not a unique situation. It's not unique for Lake County. It's not unique for any of the counties, to be honest. With high quality wetlands, and that area was identified to be a high quality wetland for floristic reasons. It has a diverse plant community. It also was completely surrounded by a very dense area of buckthorn and other non-native and invasive species, which significantly reduced the quality of the buffer surrounding it. Buckthorn is it's all over River Woods. You probably are all familiar with it. Maybe you're not, but it's a plant that's called allelopathic. It prevents other plants from growing underneath it. It typically has bare soil underneath it. It supercharges earthworms and it eats all the dirt and the leaf matter and everything else. So it leaves bare earth underneath it. So elimination of buckthorn is a significant benefit to wetland buffer and to wetland. And you look at Ryerson Woods, which you're very close to, probably many of you have visited. They've spent countless hours and man hours clearing buckthorn out of that preserve to allow the natives to establish and grow and revegetate more densely than it would otherwise. So on this site, the developer did something that's actually unique. So this is one thing that's unique about this. He took and went on his own volition to remove the buckthorn to improve the ability for the wetland and the buffer to become more native dominated, similar to what you're seeing out here in your own parking lots. In this right out here in front of our cars is native prairie and stuff. So that's the benefit. We're allowing the reduction in buffer width because by the elimination of the non-native and invasive species, it's highly likely that the native dominated communities will expand on that wetland area. And even though there'll be lawns close to it, the net is a benefit, not a detriment. And so that's why we allowed the reduction in the buffer near those homes.
Okay, so let me ask you a question since I am not an expert. And by the way, many of us have removed the buckthorn from our properties as well. And do it unfortunately every 5 years when it grows back. But here's the question. If you've got turf grass 50 feet from a wetland, and you are treating that turf grass with herbicides and pesticides, and you've got the mosquito rangers coming in and spraying with all their good stuff, and you've got true green coming so that your lawn looks like green velvet. Does that stuff wash down into the wetlands, and does it become a toxicity to the natural wetland plants?
Generally speaking, those products bind to organic materials in the soil. So when they spray, especially the herbicides, they bind very quickly to the plant matter that they're sprayed on. They physically attach itself, so they typically do not flow. If it were to run off into the wetland, they basically would have to spray it, and you'd have to have rain almost immediately. But your question is, would it be a detriment? Yes, probably negligible. It's way less impactful than putting it next to a commercial center or where there's all kinds of, so I mean, this is a very low intensity use we're talking about here. If we were talking about something like a gas station, a Walmart, whatever, a Burger King, you'd have windblown trash, you'd have the landscapers out there spraying way more often, herbiciding and fertilizing and everything else. I mean, you can imagine the impacts are significant. In those cases, we do make those buffers wider. But in residential developments, generally speaking, they're fairly low impact. I can tell you, having done this for 34 years, the biggest impact caused by homeowners is homeowners who do not respect the boundary that they're given. There are people who will put swimming pools, sheds, every potted plant they ever threw away, they throw out into the wetland. That's why Riverwoods requires those boundaries to be demarked by a physical sign or post or whatever, so everybody can see this person is violating his authorized space. So it's generally speaking, if the folks respect those boundaries, we can create and do and successfully establish very high quality prairie and wetland areas as part of these developments.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have questions for Jed? I do have one. My question is, why 50% reduction? Why isn't it 20% or 30% or 40%?
Well, I didn't write the ordinance, so I can't speak for that. That's what they established as part of the ordinance. And so 50 feet is the starting point in most ordinances for buffer. So I think they were giving the flexibility for myself as a certified wetland specialist and the village engineer, who's the enforcement officer, to make a judgment call, to think about, professional, past precedent, past reviews, we're taking all these things into consideration, make a professional judgment call on, is it reasonable or not reasonable? But I can't speak for why they set it up as a 50% reduction.
Well, as I read the ordinance, it's up to 50%, so it could be 20%.
Yeah, it is. I'm not here to, I'm not here as the zoning review guy. Mine is strictly a wetland ecological perspective. And I can just tell you that what I did, allowing it to put on the 50 feet, was based on a lot of the activity that he's done to remove the buckthorn, to improve that area. If he was doing something that was of more high intensity use, it would have been less. But it's not, I don't consider that use of the property to be a high intensity use. It's basically as low as you can get with any form of development. The only thing less would be not habitating those structures, right? I mean, or I guess the lowest would be not building, which is some folks would prefer, but if you're going to build something, this is about as low as an impact you could possibly achieve as a single family house.
If it were a 40% reduction, could the house still be built? Or does it have to be a 50% reduction?
I don't think
Not going to
that's,
talk about zoning or planning. That's
Do you know?
not my call. I'm only looking at it from an ecological standpoint.
I don't know because you'd have to play around with the design to see what you did. I mean, so he wasn't looking at it from the standpoint of what's buildable. And if the applicant had been told a different wetland buffer, the applicant could have then tried to readjust the lot lines. So I don't know what that would have resulted in.
Any other questions? Okay, what's the next step?
Well, if you're gonna,
Yeah, we'll take comments from the public. Please step up and identify yourself and your address.
My name is George Gill. Rayburn Court in Riverwoods. We are on the western edge of the property.
Excuse me, is this being picked up by the microphone?
Use this?
Yeah, and turn the button up.
Okay. Is that test?
Thank you. That's good.
Good. Anyway, first of all, I'd like to start by just recognizing you introduced Mr. Anderson as the enforcement officer, and he is not, you're not the enforcement officer, or you are the wetland specialist.
Carissa Smith is the actual enforcement officer. She's not.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'd like to thank you all for giving me a chance to address my concerns and opinions regarding the 1400 Saunders project. My intent in speaking to you today is to encourage wetland preservation while still welcoming new neighbors. A little bit about me. We have lived in Riverwoods for 27 years. We're in our second house now that we've been in for, I think, almost 8 years. But we chose Riverwoods because of the natural beauty and also the fact that it is not only naturally beautiful, but it's also defended. It is clearly a goal within the organization. If you go onto the Riverwoods website and you look at the documentation, it talks ad nauseum about the environment and protecting the environment and how important that is. And that's important to myself and many others. The proposed project, in summary, does not reflect the standards of Riverwoods and its protection of nature. I'd like to address how we're applying existing requirements for protecting the wetland and how this project fails to meet Riverwood standards and violates the Lake County Watershed Development Ordinance. Specifically, I'd like to address 6 categories, issues including the wetland delineation study, how the wetland is being evaluated, the buffer standards that are being applied, consideration for the buckthorn removal that was performed, runoff and its effect on other homeowners, and neighborhood congruency. In summary, I'm asking that you withhold your approval until these points are thoroughly investigated and resolved. Please note that 2 of the 3 adjacent homeowners have strenuously objected to parts of this project. I being one, the other being Todd Obinger and his wife to the north of the proposed development. And there's also Dan Frost, another resident that is also disagreeing with what is being done. Unfortunately, the Obingers and Mr. Frost could not be with us today. They had family obligations out of town, but I know that their concerns have been clearly communicated via, in writing and orally to a number of people. In fact, that is a bit of a concern that these objections have been communicated to Mr. Zimmerman, to Mr. Anderson, to Ms. Smith, Mr. Crawley. Yet the submission for your approval in your hands mentions absolutely nothing about that. It has all the letters from all the different authorities and checks the box, but there's nothing about all the issues that we've been raising. So first of all is the wetland delineation study. It was conducted on the property, but there were significant issues with that study. It was done by a company that's paid for by the landowner. That obviously creates a bit of a conflict of interest because they're getting paid by the person who wants to get something approved. Perhaps the bigger issue is that the company that did the study boasts on their website of their ability to get difficult projects approved in the North Shore of Chicago. So clearly their objective is to satisfy that landowner's needs. The study was performed in November, and the Watershed Development Ordinance specifically states it should be done in the growing season, May 15th to October 1st. Thankfully, our objections were heard, and it's my understanding that the study was refreshed within the proper timing. But I argue that perhaps it was not refreshed. Mr. Anderson explained to me that the report was refreshed when he walked the property and clearly marked the wetland boundary using visual cues. But that's not what the Watershed Development Ordinance calls for. It calls for a floristic quality assessment using a set of standards during the growing season. And it specifies that if off-season assessments are done, that additional testing may be required. Excuse me. The main section of the wetland is ranked as a high-quality aquatic resource. And the small wetland area to the northeast corner missed being scored as a high-quality aquatic resource by 1/10 of 1%. If it had been 1/10 of 1% higher, it would have ranked as a high-quality aquatic resource. But again, this is done by a company that prides itself on getting projects approved. That northwest section, the small part of the wetland that's in the northwest section, is essentially being ignored. Mr. Anderson's report states that no buffer is required for the ordinance for the small wetland area. I've poured through that Watershed Development Ordinance, and I cannot find anything that gives permission to ignore a wetland. Contrary, actually, there is a statement, 505.01, states buffer areas shall be required for all areas defined as either waters of the United States or isolated waters of Lake County, period. There's no qualification. All areas should have a buffer. In addition, the ordinance states that non-linear, high-quality aquatic resources should have a minimum buffer of 100 feet. That specification does not also include any size restrictions. If it's ranked as a high-quality aquatic resource, it should get a 100-foot buffer. The wetland delineation study identifies the small wetland as being a separate wetland. They call it wetland A and wetland B. And I argue that both of these flow to the same waterway, and they are connected to each other through a ditch. And by labeling that small wetland as a separate wetland, the developer is given a different set of standards that they can apply. In other words, it can get ignored. So that section of the wetland no longer shares the size criteria of the larger area. The bigger the wetland, the more the buffer counts. It no longer shares the high quality aquatic resource rating of the larger area. It missed it by 1/10%. It does not create a zoning issue that would likely exist from enforcing any buffer on that northeast corner because the lot size would possibly fall below the 80,000 square foot requirement as it's called for with zoning. Now, I know that the watershed development ordinance ignores ditches, but it doesn't ignore the wetland itself. Last I checked, water follows the path of least resistance. And if you have two sections of wetland that are adjacent or right next to each other and they are connected via water that flows through a ditch, that's how they're going to be connected. And I don't think that gives you permission to completely negate the entire small buffer. I understand that, and again, I'm not a wetland expert, but doing a little research, I understand that adjacency is a hot topic now when talking about wetlands, and the concept simply being that what affects this one also affects this one because they are connected or close to each other. Mr. Anderson's packet letter incorrectly states that the applicant is providing a 100-foot buffer around the bulk of the wetland. I looked at the designs and I see 50-foot buffers applied everywhere around all three homes, and no increase in buffers in other areas are required. And that was, I guess, a point I skipped a little bit there, that this high quality or the buffer amount is allowed to be reduced, as you know, up to 50%. Thank you for identifying the fact that that is the maximum. And I hate to say the fact that we went straight to the maximum, but it also calls for the buffer being made up elsewhere. So if you take 50 feet away here, you need to add it back somewhere else. And nowhere in this plan is there anything about adding buffer back. In fact, the only buffer measurements I see are ones that are 50 feet around the three homes. Mr. Anderson also states that the ordinance provides allowances for negotiation of the final buffer based on context, quality, mitigation impact efforts, and consistency with past reviews. Now, again, I've looked through this watershed development ordinance, and nowhere can I find anywhere that it provides these types of accommodations to the evaluator. And specifically, nowhere can I find anything that states that past reviews or past studies of other wetlands can be used as justification for mitigating or reducing this wetland. Point number 4 are trees. The tree survey that's included in the packet is used as a foundation for other representations. Now, I may be wrong here, and I'll be the first to admit that, but I do believe the woodland or the tree inventory that's being used is very old and outdated, because I know the prior owner had that done and it looks very, very similar. So I don't think it's based on accurate information. And if that's the case, Mr. Zimmerman, who is relying on that document to assess tree removals and fees, is not going to be able to get accurate computations because the map itself is not accurate. I would note also that Mr. Zimmerman's report also claims that his report applies to only one of the 3 lots. And so if this is requesting approval for the entire development of 3 different lots, yet his report only applies to one of the lots, is the requirement still being met for approval? It should be noted that the owner is getting 100% credit for the buckthorn removal expense, and it's credited towards the tree mitigation expense. Now, if the buckthorn expense is used as justification for buffers as well, it's kind of double dipping with the same act. There was an effort to improve the land, and that's being used as justification to not charge them fees to take down other trees. It's also being used for justification in allowing the buffer to be less. So it's, in my opinion, a bit of double dipping with the same act. Runoff for adjacent properties. The engineering letter to Russ Crowley from Ms. Smith states an impact that specifically affects my property. And it says once final grading is submitted, a drainage easement may be required located on shared property lines to convey runoff for adjacent properties to outlet either to the east or west. So is that essentially saying that I'm going to have a easement applied to my property? And if that's the case, I strongly object. Okay. Also, does it indicate or suggest that there would be a changed water dynamic on my property? If they need to make changes, well, why is that? Because water is being redirected, and I'm concerned that it would be redirected on my property. And finally, or specifically regarding the northernmost lot, shoehorning in a very small spec home in a location that's up against the neighbor's property would essentially ignore neighborhood congruency and clash with the surrounding homes. Just stuffing in a small home in the corner. I'd like to close with a question and an observation. My question is, was any other configuration considered that would allow for 3 building lots, yet protect the wetland? This is a large piece of property, and that center lot being 6 acres. I'm hard pressed to think that they could not have found another solution that would have allowed 3 buildable lots. And the Watershed Development Ordinance calls for alternate considerations. It says a narrative of the alternate measures taken in sequence to avoid and minimize wetland impacts to isolated waters of Lake County before mitigation is considered. I don't see any other considerations that have been made. Now, it's clear, in closing, it's clear that the buckthorn removal by the new owner is receiving high praise, and that's great. But it's also being used to, in my opinion, bend the rules. This very property underwent buckthorn removal approximately 9 years ago, and it grew back very, very quickly. So it appears that buckthorn removal is only temporary, but marginalizing the wetland is forever. I respectfully request that we receive follow-up on these points. And again, I really appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Copies of this. I don't think I have enough.
If you give it to me, I can make sure it's part of the record.
I think I have 4, 5.
But I can make it part of the whatever, put it online. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Take a look at them. You'll share. That's great. I did think about using this much paper.
Okay, would the applicant like to address the Plan Commission?
Okay, so I don't have anything to add with regard to your presentation. I think it was very accurate. Sorry. However, there's a number of inaccuracies were stated just previously. So a few of them. The buckthorn removal the gentleman had mentioned was paid for, reimbursed rather by the village, which 100%, which is nowhere near true. It just so happens I spent a great deal of money to do the mitigation, and a small percentage of it was reimbursed by the village. So the suggestion that there's double dipping and it somehow cooks the objective that we have is just factually incorrect. Regarding the buffer, it's limited to 50 feet in some areas, but the average buffer area is beyond 100 feet. And the engineers that worked on the project were very specific about that. It's not particularly clear here, but the average buffer around the entire area of the wetlands exceeds 100 feet. And in some areas, it's reduced to 50 feet. Further, the areas where you can see where they're boxed out where a house will be built, the house doesn't take up nearly the whole area of those boxes. That's just the area that is permissible where a house could be built. So it might not be clear to somebody if you look at that. We just delineated the areas where the house could be built in, and then a very small percentage of that area is going to be the house. It's kind of hard to explain, but hopefully you can follow that. There seemed to be some concern in particular about Lot 1, the house in the northeast section. This gentleman said that it was shoehorned in and it was stuffed in. It's a 2-acre lot with established front side yard setbacks, not unlike any other lot. We're not asking for a variance. We're building the house within the established setbacks of a 2-acre lot, very low density. In fact, there's a significant area of wetland between this house and this gentleman's house, which is quite a ways to the west across the wetland. Under no scenario would any sort of drainage issue create a problem for his house when this house is built. It's nowhere near it, and it's not on top of anything. These established setbacks up and down these streets, everyone's got the same rules. I'm not looking for a change to any of the rules. Uniquely here, we've got over a 10-acre site with 3 houses, very low density compared to anything in the area. I do see that the civil engineer drew in some drainage easement area, but it would not be anything between lot 1 and the lot immediately to the west. There's an entire wetlands area between those 2 houses. Those are all my comments in response to the last comments.
Thank you.
Okay.
Does anybody else want to address the Plan Commission on this subject? Any questions from commissioners? All right, so what do we do? Do we vote?
Well, when a person, I'm reading from our Village Code. When a person submitting a plat of subdivision for final approval is supplied all drawings, maps, and other documents required by the municipal ordinances to be furnished. And if all such material meets all municipal requirements, the Plan Commission shall approve the proposed plat within 30 days after the date of the filing of the last required document, et cetera. So either we approve it, we don't approve it, if we don't think it met the requirements of the ordinances. And if we approve it, it's advisory and it goes to the village board. If there's any a motion for approval, it would be for approval condition on satisfying the requirements in the review letters, which I think the applicant knows about. And that particular comment about the easements, I had talked to Kirsten Smith about that. It has to do with providing, when the new homes eventually are constructed, there may be ways in which the water joins up between them to run on a common lot line, for example, toward the wetland area. So you don't know the ultimate drainage patterns among the 3 lots until you see what the final grades are of the houses. But this isn't an issue that concerns the property to the west. This is a property within the subdivision. If it's not, she wasn't really worried about it. It's just really a note that's the kind of thing that will have to be addressed when plans come in. I think one of the other comments was, what about doing with the tree mitigation on the other 2 lots? I think all that Steve Zimmerman was saying is that when and if we get building permit applications for those other lots, then he'll do the same kind of computation for tree mitigation on those lots. We don't know where the house is going to go yet, so you don't know what trees are going to be removed yet. Some of the comments are in the form of, notes like, we're approving it, but be aware of this. They're not really, intended to be deficiencies in the current proposal.
Would you please step to the microphone?
On all 3 lots, we have identified which trees would be removed, even though we only have conception of where the houses will be. But it's very clearly delineated, the species, the size, which
Right.
trees.
But we wouldn't collect the mitigation fee until a permit is taken out. We don't usually do that.
I just want to be clear that it's just not arbitrary. We know exactly where the houses are going to go
okay,
and
okay.
which trees would be removed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Jed, if I could just ask a question, if I may. Do you think that the wetland delineation was defective?
Made some notes here. So the wetland delineation was done in November originally. I came out to look at the delineation and I asked them to come out and reflag part of the wetland, specifically the area around Lot 1, that we had them reevaluate that. And I double checked it. So it was done during the growing season. It completely follows protocol. Let me just mention too, 99.9% of projects that are developed in Chicagoland, the developer hires the wetland consultant. The wetland consultant works for that person. That's why you have me to check his work to verify he's done it in a way that meets the requirements. I don't know who to hire him otherwise. Otherwise, you'd have the government providing that service. They don't have the capacity to do that. So having the wetland consultant hired by the developer is absolutely 100% routine. It's just part of it. Regarding the wetland high quality and the FQA, you talked about doing that updated wetland floristic quality. Once it's found to be high quality, you're only saying it's more high quality if you come back out and reevaluate and you find more plants. It's already achieved the highest standard. Additional evaluation, there isn't another higher level. It's just high quality and regular quality, period. It had achieved high quality, so there was no necessity to go out and redo additional work on that area. Regarding that small wetland to the east of the Lot 1 house, the wetland under section 505 B1 of the ordinance states that it has to be larger than 1/3 of an acre. It's 3,700 square foot. It's not even 1/10 of an acre. So that wetland would not get a buffer under the ordinance. Roadside ditches are specifically excluded under the ordinance as wetland. Back to the buffer question, all the undevelopable areas on the development that are not outlined as those envelopes as he showed are buffer. That's how we reviewed it. So I know they drew the 100-foot buffer, but it goes beyond because there's never going to be any development back there, right, in those other areas. So that's part of the buffer. When we, as reviewers, are thinking about it, will something ever be built there? No, not in this case. So that becomes part of the buffer. Regarding the consistency question about, I'm answering this because I feel like that was a bit of a judgment call on me. I need to be consistent. If I'm not consistent with all my reviews through all the different communities I work on, I become arbitrary and capricious. I need to be consistent on all my reviews. I need to take all that into consideration, my years of experience. When somebody makes an application to me, they want to know what to expect when I do that review. I'm the same way. I make applications to many people. I would like to know that they're going to be consistent with past projects and not change their point of view on me, blindsiding me, basically. That's all I have.
Thank you.
We went to a great time and expense to develop an entirely new tree inventory, which was submitted already with regard to all, I'm pointing to it here, all the trees, the species of the trees, the breast height diameter of all the trees. That was done at a great expense.
I think it's dated July 12th or something like that.
I just wrote the check for it today. Thank you. It was just done. I can assure you.
Yes. Please use the microphone.
I'm clearly not a certified wetland specialist, but you mentioned that the small section of the wetland had to be 1/3 of an acre to count, more or less. And I remember reading the ordinance, and that size restriction was talking about linear wetlands, I thought, versus at the bottom, it specified high quality. It's 100 feet, and there was no size restriction. I mean, if you could point me to that specific area, I would appreciate it.
Yes, 505 D1 for all water bodies or wetlands, total surface area greater than 1/3 acre, but less than 1 acre, and minimum buffer width of 30 feet shall be established.
Can I say that? Just
Can I suggest that, we have other business tonight. So I think,
So we're ready to
okay.
entertain the motion.
I could make the motion to approve the plat based on the conditions. No? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll make the motion to approve the plat based on the conditions set forth in the review letters provided to us.
All non-linear bodies.
Is there a second?
I don't see where is it. I mean, the 1/3 of an acre is where?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion while we're waiting for, is there any discussion? I'll say it so we can
roll
vote.
call.
No, that's good. Thank you. Is it a roll call?
Do you have a motion? You have a
We have a
second?
motion and a second.
I'll third it.
We need a roll call vote.
Roll call. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Baylock,
Aye.
Commissioner Dot,
Aye.
Creditor,
Nay.
Commissioner Levine, Commissioner Wolfbach.
Aye.
and Chairperson Berklock.
No,
What was the final vote?
4-6,
4 to 2.
4-2. 4-2 in
Motion
favor.
pass.
Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Okay, the plat will be forwarded with a recommendation to the Board of Trustees for consideration.
And now we can move on to our old business, which is discussion of sub-area plan amendment to the comprehensive plan relating to Walters Kluwer property. Bruce?
So we have some pretty pictures. If everyone in the audience, we're going to try and get these up on the screen. I want you to hold on to your britches. These are purely conceptual. This is, you're here in the early brainstorming part of the evening. I'm sorry?
Are my riches the ones you're referring to?
No. Anybody who might find these images disturbing, this is mature content and is intended for mature audiences. The origin of what you're looking at is we've been contacted by the folks at Walters Kluwer for a long time now. They were telling us they were going to put the property on the market. They kept telling us they were going to put the property on the market. Then they didn't for quite a while. We started talking with Tesca Associates, the village planner, and said, what's going to happen here? And Walters Kluwer told us, as you keep hearing from everyone who has these big office buildings, that they didn't think that they could find a buyer for the office building. Walters Kluwer's building is about 200,000 square feet. First thing we said to them was, well, tell Baxter to buy your building because Baxter wants a smaller building. And if Baxter wants to stay in the area and wants a smaller building, we definitely made that suggestion to them, but they assured us that we were way behind them already. They had already tried that. Walters Kluwer is represented by a real estate company. The broker, who's sort of the prime person on this, has met with us a number of times, and she seems to be very sensitive to understanding that villages are unique. She followed what happened with Lexington Homes quite intently. She doesn't want Walters Kluwer to have that kind of disappointment and to go through something that nobody wants. And in fact, one of the top officers from Walters Kluwer in their real estate division came from, I guess it was Holland, and he sat and met with Trustee Hollander and me and the mayor with the broker and said, we love the village, we've loved our time here, we want to be respectful, we want this to end up well. We don't know what the market will bring. Obviously, most people are talking to us about residential. We have not really shown a lot of interest in heavy commercial uses. We expressed a great deal of interest in adaptively reusing the office building. If you read about it, there's some talk about trying to convert buildings like this to senior living, to condominiums, to residential. 200,000 square feet is a lot of building. Sometimes the ability to convert these to residential is fraught with problems. If you've been reading about what they're talking about with office buildings in downtown, and residential requires a lot of plumbing. The office building doesn't have, plumbing for all of that. Residential might require, unless it was, say, senior living, it would require probably underground parking. There's not enough underground parking, or it would require some kind of covered parking if it was upscale residential. The width of the the two south wings of the Walters Kluwer building are each about 100 feet in width. And if you were designing a residential wing and you had a hall going down the middle and units on each side of the hall, a double loaded hall, each of you can, you're used to that kind of thing. The sweet spot for that would be about 60 feet wide. the hall might be 8 feet or 10 feet, but then the units are 20, 25 feet. They're not 35 feet or 40 feet. The units starts to become unwieldy. It's hard to get enough light, natural light. There's issues with there are issues. So when we first sat down with Tesco Associates, we said, let's not wait for the developer. We tried to do this a little bit with Federal Life, and they weren't very receptive. But Wolters Kluwer at the time, Wolters Kluwer was interested in what we might come up with. And I think they said that they have a very serious commitment to reducing their carbon footprint, and that if there was a way to adaptively reuse the building, they would consider it. So Nick Patera in the office of Tesco Associates, took some time, and there's sketches here that he lettered A through E, A, B, C, D, E. And what do we have here up here right now? That's A. So one of the things so they were on the site, they know that the north 13 acres or so are very precious woodlands. And what he tried to do was show designs that basically didn't disturb anything north of the existing office building. We told the same thing when we met with Wolters Kluwer. We told them the same thing. Don't touch anything north of the existing office building. If there's anything to be redeveloped on the site, either stay where the existing office building is or go south of that. This exhibit is alternate A, is the building with not really a specified adaptive use yet, but assuming that someone would find a way to keep it, and then showing a number of cluster homes. These are 20 buildings. Each building has 2 units, so these are sort of duplexes. On one side, that's area 2. Is everyone looking at, are we all looking at the same thing, alternate A? Okay. And then this was the duplex area. He calls it area 2. This is area 3. I think there are more duplexes. So So in running through these alternates tonight, the idea is simply to start our minds thinking. What we think we should try and do is, as a community, try and learn from our experiences and try and come up with something that's a little more precise that we can say to the development community, give them much more of a roadmap to what we're looking for on the site, in the hopes that we get better proposals and proposals that are more in the spirit of Riverwood. So that's alternate A. If you turn to alternate B, this is a slightly denser, I think, development. The other one had 20 and 20 had 40 units plus the building. This has some kind of commercial center. I think one of the trustees, maybe it might have been Trustee Haber at one point, said something about this might be the last opportunity for the village to have a little tiny bit of a town center of some sort. I think there was also an idea that medical office of some sort might be very useful here. So Tesco Associates showed a type of more of a commercial building at the very southwest corner of the site. Again, keeping the building with the cluster over on the east side. And we go to alternate C. Now this one gets up to more of a total, he's got a total here of 120 units. The site is about 48 acres. So we're talking about 2.5, let's see, 2.5 units an acre. What's 120 divided by 50? 2.4, thank you. There's always someone good at math when you need them. So this is assuming that the building cannot be saved, and this would probably be, if you ask the development community, this would probably be kind of the, this is something that they would look at and say, okay, that's a typical plan, but can we get a few more units than that? But 120 units at 2.4 units an acre, slightly more dense than Thorngate, which is 2 units an acre, essentially. But what they're showing a little bit of is sort of the clustering idea, because they're trying to keep everything again out of the north part of the site. All of these plans so far only show access off of Lake Cook Road. They are trying to show a trail system up through the woods to get over to the Village Hall. So that might be one way for folks to get there. They might want a little more of a direct connection than to wander all through the woods just to get to the Village Hall if they wanted to walk there to pay a bill or something. So, there are definitely some things to think about how a community of folks who are Riverwoods residents living on the site would become part of the community other than having to get in their car and go out on Lake Cook Road. Alternate D. So this one, again, is a different arrangement of homes. He's showing 92 units. This is assuming that this would be, basically multifamily, probably a common landlord. So, a managed property. And then the last page is alternate E. I think in some ways alternate E reminds me of some of the ideas that David Oler and others floated about the federal life parcel. These are smaller buildings. I forgot at the time, I think they were talking about 1,600 square foot units, maybe 2,400 units. So some of these are smaller type units. He's showing 61 units in total. So I guess these are a couple of one unit buildings would be like a cottage home, and then a 2 unit building would be like a duplex, and a 3 unit building, I guess, would be a threeplex. Is there a better word for a threeplex? Triplex. I knew you'd have that. Thoughts?
I've got a few notes I made. Is this just a free flowing?
This is just thoughts. Yeah.
First question. This is a question, I guess, for everybody here. Is there an association, some kind of a group of residents, informal or formal, kind of much like with Lexington, that's representing community interest in the site, that's either approached the commission or the board of trustees or is here? I know we had a group that kind of represented a larger interest that was heavily involved with Lexington. Has that?
Not for this. It's early because very few
Right.
people know that this is being discussed. We mentioned it, but there's no pending application. We don't have, so it's very early. I also think that there are probably fewer residences who live in close proximity to this than
Right.
lived in the other site. I've kind of been wondering about that. You've got, on Chianti, the village owns 3 of the 4 lots. Discover is to one side. Forest Preserve, I can see, a few homes, but it's not quite as many.
I mean, I guess since this is on record, I would recommend any enthusiastic residents. It was helpful with Lexington to get perspective. I mean, we're all residents, but there's 6 of us. So it was helpful to hear from the community at large. Number 2, I have 4 points. Can I just keep rolling? Okay.
Absolutely.
Number 2, Walters Kluwer, are they do they know what they want in terms of their involvement with the site? I mean, are they looking to sell to someone, anyone, and then off they go?
Right.
Do they want any involvement whatsoever in the project?
No.
Okay, all right. That was just a question. Number 3, I think this is just my opinion, but the concept of a village center and the concept of multifamily, I mean, I'm open to both of them just as an individual resident. But it's not like those two concepts are, and they're not similar, but are a non-starter for me. But I think with Lexington, we ran into like a fundamental issue of trying to kind of be something that we're not as a community. And I think you really toe the line a lot when you get into the village center, especially, but even to a certain extent with multifamily, if it's not done in an extremely unique way, because there isn't really anything like Riverwood. So to have a village center like another village, I mean, to me, it's kind of almost like getting back into that same territory that we tried. And again, I'm not saying as a commissioner, there's no way that I would be open to any concept of a town center or multifamily, but it's just a harder sell, I think, for Riverwoods as a village, my opinion. That was my 3rd point. And then I guess my 4th point, this is the last comment that I really have about this, is if Wolters Kluwer is looking to just sell it and move on, they want nothing to do with whatever happens, is there a way that they could be either influenced or asked or dialogued with to possibly just perform the site demolition themselves and turn it into a green space that's just a buildable green space? And then the theory behind that would be whoever buys it is spending the dollars to demo the site regardless, unless they can sell it to somebody who wants to use it as an office, which, is going to be tough. But if somebody has to spend that money to demo the site anyway as a developer, could they be encouraged to spend that money themselves, add it to the sale price, and then we have, instead of a vacant office building, we have just more green space in Riverwoods? That then there's not so much pressure. Like Federal Life as a building, everybody's kind of like, what are we going to do with it? If there's no building, whether it's 1 year or 10 years, when the right project comes, it comes. Obviously, we hope the right project comes right away, but if it doesn't, there's no pressure with an existing vacant building. So that thought, I think, is one that's in here. And now I just wanted to.
Okay, duly noted.
Except here, I think we're trying to encourage the redevelopment of that building. The Federal Life is not something you'd want to redevelop. The Wolters Kluwer building definitely is.
When you say redevelopment, you mean like new purchaser buys it and uses it as the same type of an office that
Or
Wolters Kluwer
maybe
did?
to redevelop it into small commercial, small offices, but independent offices, retail, something like that.
They would change the footprint though then of the existing building, right? Or you're saying
Not
keep-
necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. I mean, have you ever been in that building or seen that building?
I've been on the site, but I don't think I've ever been inside.
It's an amazing building and it should be preserved if at all possible.
Okay.
Can I? Oh, I'm sorry.
Ahead.
I just want to say something. I've learned that, been in Riverwoods now almost 6 years living here, and it's not always easy to approve things. I've learned that very much so. And one of the things that I do see, which would be nice, and I know we just talked about this, alternative B, we really don't have any kind of a town center per se in Riverwoods. If it was possible to do something like that, I think it would be nice to have something like that, just as me as a resident, not being even on the commissioner here. But I do feel if there was a way of doing that, it would be nice to have something like that. And I know it's very difficult to pass things here, as we could see with Lexington, different things of that nature. So I figured that's me on record just saying that myself, so.
Sherry?
I love the idea of attached ranch houses I think that is absolutely brilliant. That provides senior housing as well as young family housing, and seniors and young people should be together. A couple of these plans that show the attached 1, 2, and 3 unit ranch houses, attached houses. No, you're not going to get 92 residences in there, but what you're going to get is prime residence that will attract. I mean, let's face it, guys, I'm getting old. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to make it up and down the stairs in my house. I love my community and I don't want to leave. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. So to have a place where seniors can come and live on the same property with kids, which make our lives rich, that's as appealing to me as anything else I'm looking at here.
So you're saying like a senior, like community? Is that
Doesn't
what
have
you're?
to be a senior community,
Not a
no.
senior community, so
If
young
it's a
and old.
single story, if they are ranch
Okay.
houses so that seniors can move in.
Okay, okay, branch out.
And
So
young
you,
people, I want to see, you know,
Thorngate has that.
yeah. How
Would you-
many single family?
No, they have ranch homes. They have ranch homes.
Yeah, but not
And-
enough,
No, of course.
not enough.
Could you accept a home with a master bedroom on the or primary bedroom on the first floor and
That's mine, but
most of the models are really 2-story homes. I don't think they're showing 1-story homes, but they,
One of them was ranch houses specifically in here.
okay.
Yes.
Well, Sherry,
And yes, I would not mind living on the first floor, me and my dog. You know what? If
You like my
anybody
house.
looked in the windows and saw my body, they'd probably have a heart attack anyway.
Sherry, I agree with you. And actually a reference that Steve and I have looked at a little bit is Villas North down in Northbrook. Have you ever been through there? It's north off of Forest View. And they're about 2,235 square foot houses. All look like they're single story. They're single unit, single family homes. They're on about average a quarter acre each, so about 4 per acre down there. But it looks kind of like the thing I think we should be looking for.
Right. And I wouldn't even mind if it was a smaller lot. I mean, I think that if you're going to start with attached properties rather than detached, they can get more. That land's not going to be cheap. There has to be an incentive for someone to want to build on it.
we don't have a senior community in Riverwoods right now at all.
We do not.
Now, the closest one is Deerfield. Deerfield has a senior community. Highland Park has a senior community. We do not have a senior community. So I could see where you're coming from. Not a bad idea, but obviously mixing it up a little bit would be good.
Yeah, but I'd love to see it mixed up.
Like you said,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Sherry, are you reacting most positively to E, alternate E, or are there several of them that you could see?
Hold on.
Any of them that combine those kind of homes with, say, the existing building would be okay as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. You know, I don't want to be so restrictive that nobody's going to ever want to build on it. I'd like to see that land populated. But very frankly, I'd like to see it populated by as many of our residents who want that. Both people with young kids and want to be in a tighter community. And I have bumped into a lot of those people looking at properties in Riverwoods and seniors. It would be ideal.
Well, the good thing about that place in Northbrook is that it's always desirable. Units are always for sale and selling quick. It's like a 35-year-old development. There's obviously improvements and modifications we could make, but the concept of having something small like that with quality residents and some kind of solidness.
I have an idea. How about a library in Riverwoods? No library in Riverwoods.
Do you know that 30 years ago, when I moved into this community, we were talking about a library in Riverwoods, and we're still talking about it now. But we've got the little bitty library out by the street with some darn good books on it.
But there were some things that we've talked about in the last few years that are like, pie in the sky things. I remember one time there was an idea for having like a boat thing that pulled up to the river so people could start to use the river for recreation. I'm not suggesting, I'm just saying if we build the right kind of homes in this area, we can start to do those kind of things. We can add those things in and really define what the character of that piece of property would be.
So one of the things that that this discussion can prompt is do we want to, would we be comfortable, what would make us comfortable taking up an amendment to the comprehensive plan? So we did this a couple of years ago, looking at the Federal Life site. We didn't do this at Wolters Kluwer. Right now, the site in the comprehensive plan is office. So if you wanted to say to someone, we like this cluster home concept, these cottage homes, amending the comprehensive plan to show that that's now another acceptable use for the site would be an important signal to send in terms of, what our community intention is. Right now, our community intention doesn't reflect this. Are we, what would you need before you would feel, obviously one of the things TSCA could do is they can have drawings like this as part of the amendment. They can have illustrative drawings so that when you're saying that you're in favor of something, you could tie it, I think, to something more specific.
Well, we got the section on the mixed use overlay. How does that relate to, that's right after the office campus and office compatible section of the comprehensive plan.
I think I'm a little wary of the mixed use overlay because the idea was to be in an area that could have a combination of mixed uses. And I'm not sure what we're hearing here is a combination of uses.
Well, alternate B would be, right? Maybe that's the only one.
That's the town. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I would love to see that building preserved. It is so magnificent.
You could do C, D, and E with
Yeah.
the building, you just would have a reduction in, you can just kind of play around with the arrangement of the residential.
Yeah, all of them depending on, or almost all of them, depending on the adaptive use of the existing building could be mixed use.
Yeah, I think I would defer to the planners to how to best amend the land use map and the comprehensive plan. Also, we're going to have a new director of community services starting here in a couple of weeks who has lots of planning background. Russ is finally retiring for, I think, the third time. And we have someone new who'll be starting with us who has a tremendous amount of experience. So, we can, next time we meet, we can maybe, to have some more suggestions on how to bring this forward. And if you amend the comprehensive plan, I think you publish, I think there's like a public comment and meeting kind of thing where you say, this is the proposed amendment. So there are various ways you could try and involve the larger community, which here you might want to do before you just amend the plan. You might want to figure out how you're going to.
What would be nice is if we could take some of these and actually visualize what it would look like. Because obviously you're looking at this, but maybe we can actually come up with something and say, here's what this could look like if we did it this way.
They're just going to take the Lexington buildings, cut off the first.
Yeah.
Just joking. Just joking.
Actually, since you bring that up, do we want to say we don't want anything over 2 stories?
I would be in favor of that.
I would too, and I think that would help a lot of other residents.
So the curious thing about Lexington was it was not really over 2 stories in the way that you're thinking. All of our houses, which meet a 35-foot maximum, are kind of like 2.5. And because they had the garage at the bottom, you could say it was 3 stories, but since they were meeting the height requirement, it wasn't that they were really, they weren't higher than single-family homes are allowed to be. It's just the look of them. So, if you said it can't be more than 2 stories, some of these might be 35 feet in height.
Well, a town center, a fitness center would be a lot bigger if you had a fitness center.
Oh, Trustee Hollander would like to make, I've never seen him in short pants.
Yeah. Summer.
There's 718 Ringland Road. This was dropped in your lap, and maybe I can give you just a minute or so the reasons why. I don't think there's much question that the Lexington process maybe taught us some things of how to do this better next time. And the idea was to try to come up with what we wanted to see on the Federal Life property, but also on Walters Kluwer. So we're talking about Walters Kluwer for the moment. So rather than being at the behest of whatever developer wants to put there and then having us react to it, the idea was to come up with some idea of what we would like to see there and then provide the parameters that would permit that. Now, there has to be somewhat flexible. You can't say we want plan B and then have someone build it. But we certainly can put in place the density, you can put in place height, you can put in place green space, you can define what kind of housing that we would like to see there. And if we at least come up with the idea of what we would accept, or you could do the reverse and what you don't want, I think that we would have some control over our own future. Right now, they sell to someone and then they come up with a plan and try to get us to buy into it. I'd like to change that and make us a little more proactive. And that was the purpose of trying to rethink what we want to do with both the Federal Life property and what we want to do with Walters Kluwer. And we can get ahead of this. So at least it was my idea that the concept was for you to come up with things that are acceptable to us, then let the developer then figure out the best way to make that happen. It was also my impression that the office building, as much as we'd like to see it be maintained, that no one has been able to come up with an idea of how to renovate that or change its use. I don't know if that's going to inform you at all, but my guess is that you ought to look at this thing without that property on, without that building being on there. Anyway, that was the reason this was sort of dropped in your lap, so that we can sort of get ahead of this and tell them and figure out what we want.
So you shouldn't assume that the building will not be repurposed. There may be things afoot. And there are some interesting ideas floating around. So,
we all wanted the building to stay, but I just don't know of anybody that practically has figured out how to do it. So I'm just saying, if you're going to put effort into it, I'm not saying you don't, we're not going to try to figure out some way to keep it, but I would put your effort into assuming that this is going to be residential of some type. And you also might want to consider access to Port Wine as well, which since we have another street, when you come up with that.
I think that's such a great idea to figure out what we want first and then bring it over, just because the way that, residents here and how we think, great idea. This is much better.
So let's say that at the next meeting, we start working on the outline of a comprehensive plan amendment. Then normally, we publish it, we have a meeting, we consider it, and 3 people show up. You all seem pretty excited about some of these possibilities, but it would be better to test it against the public. Yes. And, how do we can try to use our newsletter. We can try and do something to really let people know we really want them to come. We really want them to tell us what they think of this idea before we push forward with it.
that's not even funny. I think we're talking about a couple of meetings before that happens, though. I mean, at least one meeting before that happens. Because we needed to really look at it and see what we're talking about with amending the comprehensive plan. That's a serious move.
I can ask them to try and come up with a couple of elevations for some of the products that they think they had in their mind's eye when they put these here. And I do think Tesca did a pretty nice job of showing us some possibilities for this site.
I do too. And nobody has said, but I love the idea of just not touching that woodlands at all. Just leave it. And all these designs do not touch the existing woodland. So that's great.
We could potentially reach out to some of the residents that were involved with the Lexington Federal Life and ask for some of the material they put together. They put together some kind of concepts of, no?
Well, we certainly will invite everybody to come and speak and give their thoughts. I have no problem with that at all.
Well, the concept was those cottage homes. I mean, not this particular one, but yeah, the concept was ranch homes, empty nesters, senior homes, and a mixture of, I think live lightly on the land, right? It's very River Woodsy if you can pull it off.
We also
Would there
talked
be,
about,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, we also talked about having an appearance review as part of any new zoning district, which I think would be excellent.
Does fair housing come into play with this again?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Every new development, 15% is the goal.
that's all I want to know. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments?
Does anyone from the public want to?
Anything from people in the audience? Not yet, but they will, I'm sure. Great. Well, we look forward to seeing where we go with this. Moving along, I have no comments to add, so I think we are ready to have a motion to adjourn.
I'll set a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you and good night.
It was about the subdivision plat. It was about the subdivision.